from misery to happiness to thee. I'm on my way from misery to happiness to thee. I'm on my way to what I want from this world. And years from now, you'll make it to the next world. And everything that you receive up yonder is what you give to me the day I wonder. I took a right turning yesterday.
Without further ado, I'm going to introduce these wonderful people we have here today. On the far left, we have Aaron Solomon. Aaron is currently the co-executive producer of the $100,000 Pyramid with Michael Strawn on ABC and Snoop Dogg Presents The Joker's Wild on TBS. With two daytime Emmy nominations. Aaron's past work also includes notable shows such as Survivor and Family Feud. He also recently sold a card game called That Was Awkward, which actually we have quite a few here today that we're going to give away at the end in the spirit of game show. So be ready to answer some questions and win some fun prizes.
You gotta earn it though.
We'll make you work for it. And while he's not producing shows or creating board games, Aaron actually moonlights as the bass player for The Remotes, which is a TV theme song orchestra that is the official house band for the Daytime Emmys. Very cool. And in case you were wondering, yes, he is available for wedding and bar mitzvahs. Just in case. And then to my right, I've got Terry Filipowicz. Thank you, Terry Filipowicz. Filipowicz, we're going to get it, I promise. Okay. Terry has spent most of her career in television news and as a writer and producer. She started here, actually locally in Tucson at KVOA, as a supervising producer for the morning show, Tucson Today, and spent over 10 years in TV in Sacramento as a writer, producer, field producer, executive producer, jack of many trades. She's vice president of communication and production for a book publisher, and teaches digital arts, communication, journalism, and technical writing. And she's building what she calls an education and media empire. And her life is about connecting people and helping them use their talents to change the world. So if you want to help me welcome them here today, I'm very excited. So I'm just curious, very briefly, if I could see a show of hands from the audience, who here is a writer, a producer, interested in television? Yeah, that's amazing. This is great. Cool. So
my friends.
I know. No, this is really, really wonderful. And I think, especially because we're at a book festival today, it's really important and interesting to note sort of the differences between what you guys do writing for television and thinking about how you're approaching that as opposed to traditional mediums like print or web. And I'd love if each of you could kind of walk us through, what does writing for your medium for TV actually mean? What does that look like?
You want to start? Well, so I've made a career, amazingly enough, working mostly for game shows and TV competition shows, and I'm also a member of the Writers Guild, and when the Writers Guild went on strike in 2007, I was walking the picket lines and getting a chance to meet many screenwriters and sitcom writers and people that are in different disciplines that I'm in. And the number one question I got from even the brightest, most accomplished writers there were, "Oh, you write in game shows? I thought those aren't written. I thought, wasn't there a whole movie about you can't script them? And, isn't that illegal?" And nobody really knows what it is that you actually write for a game show. So in my particular case, it's an unusual combination of you've got a script that you write for the host, which is their basic sort of language that introduces the rules to the game. It explains as the rounds progress. It's Jeopardy. We talk. No great shakes there. It's just now we're in double Jeopardy or whatever. There's certain shows we're sort of starting to steer toward comedy variety combination shows. So a lot of shows that we work on really blend different disciplines. So oftentimes there'll be jokes for the hosts or the panelists, or depending on the nature of the show, it could be a very puzzly show. There's a show that I worked on for a game show network called Idiot Test. I don't know if you haven't seen that, but it's this great show that has a terrible title because it sounds like it's stupid, but it's actually a very smart show. And you have to come up with these really intricate puzzles and sort of misleading phrases, and you have to find the answer somewhere on the screen. So depending on what type of writing it is, there's very different skill sets that are involved, and it can be anything from comedy to puzzle writing to having great trivia knowledge and being able to write amazing, misleading, multiple choice answers so that you can try to trick someone into not getting the $1 million on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, that kind of thing. So that's sort of my world.
I actually come from, in a lot of ways, the creative nonfiction realm. So that really, in terms of writing, is my genre. So making the shift between creative nonfiction and then doing something like television, they're all stories. We are storytelling people. So when I write for television, it's the same type of concept, but it's said in such a way that is more personable and accessible. So I can use absolutely, big multi-syllable words in creative nonfiction, and I'm much more aware of grammar and a sentence construction. But when I'm writing for television, for example, it's short, it's more staccato, right? It's more how we talk, but at the same time, then we're leaving out adjectives and verbs. So it's almost like phrases that we're using more so than they are sentences. So, but I like how Erin said, it said the word skill set. It's all storytelling, it's all entertaining, but it's a little bit of a shift between creative nonfiction and then something like writing for television. So it's a lot of fun, but it's a little more challenging.
Yeah, I'd be curious for each of you. Erin, I'll start with you. What kind of criteria do you consider when you're writing these questions? Where do you draw your inspiration? How do you play into, being fair and equal? What kind of things do you have to consider?
Well, yeah, essentially, it really depends on the show. But I remember one of the shows I got applause on the question. It's an amazing question. No, one of the first shows, actually the very first show that I wrote for was The Family Feud. It wasn't with Steve Harvey. This was several years ago. But I got to work on that show for 3 years, and I wrote the survey questions. They say 100 people surveyed, top whatever answers on the board. And we were sitting in this windowless office, and we would sort of be sitting there, and we go through sort of, just letting our mind kind of run. And then at some point, you just realize that just staring at the wall is not the best idea. And I found that my best inspiration came at lunchtime. I would get up and I'd walk over. There's a farmer's market, and I would sit there and I would be outside and I'd watch people, and I'd be like, there's this mother chastising a kid for misbehaving or something, and then it's like, and something a kid might do in public that their mom might, and it's true because the best questions for that kind of a show kind of are rooted in observational comedy, and it's the kind of thing that when you hear the question, you have this visceral reaction. They used to say on Family Feud, the best question is something that, imagine yourself standing at the buzzer, and as soon as somebody asks the question, it's like, name an animal whose legs you might find on a restaurant menu. You have to be able to go bam and come right in with an answer immediately. And if you sit there and it's a little too heady, or there's too many, multisyllabic words or whatever, you might get blank stares and then, strike because nobody can get the answer right. So you really have to think about the situation and what kind of reaction and impulse reaction you want to get. And then in the case of Family Feud, you've got to have it be something where you can have 3 or 4 answers that come to mind really quickly. Then you pull the answers and find out, and hopefully some of the obvious answers come back, and then it's a satisfying experience.
Yeah. And then same kind of question for you, Terry, but I think it'd be interesting to know in the world of like journalism or news, something like that, people think, oh, I just go interview somebody telling me a story, but really there's a lot of writing that's happening there behind the scenes too. Can you talk about what sort of criteria you're having to think about and how you're drafting those questions?
There's always like some standard questions you want to know about people. Because if you think about when you first meet someone and you're asking, do you live in Tucson? And what brings you to the festival? Things like that. So you're prepared almost emotionally and mentally just with questions you're going to ask. But really, it's when you're having the conversation with the person that the story begins to emerge. So, I may go in with something prepared. I have, some type of agenda. I know, I might need a visual image of this, and I have to do this. But the person and the situation, it begins to mold itself and create this beautiful tapestry when you're there. And we, all of you who are writers know this. The story comes to life as you're writing it. So there is what we call, pre-writing, but the story really begins to come to life as you're writing it.
And I think audiences today are interacting with television in new and different ways that they never have before. And I'd be curious to see how that's changed the approaches that both of you have to take when you're considering these things, whether that's how they're viewing it, social media, all of those aspects. If you could kind of tell us your approach from that.
Yeah, actually, well, I just came off of a show. If I seem a little out of it, it's because I just taped 20 episodes of a show in 5 days for The Joker's Wild with Snoop Dogg, which is, added by the fact that there was a haze of smoke surrounding the set at all times. So if I start to like talk in tongues or whatever, and please just kind of nudge me. What was the question again?
So how has
social media. Yeah, sorry. Case in point. So social media. So this has been a big thing for networks. Is that a lot of times, it used to be they were all about ratings, and the biggest ratings wins, and that's like kind of the most important thing. And then like the sort of shift of a network's perspective of what's considered a successful show. Then it shifted to demographics, and they said, okay, well, people who are 18 to 35 are more likely to not have figured out what kind of car they want to drive for the rest of their life, and not have figured out what kind of brand of toothpaste they want to be a loyal purchaser of, and therefore the ads that are placed in commercials are more likely to be effective with them. So then let's make a show that is driven more toward that demo. And the latest exciting thing that we now have to have our content compromised by is social media. Is the idea that anything can, I learned the term on this last show, snackable moments, which is a moment that is like 2 minutes or less that happens in your show that is ideally spontaneous, but networks are trying to create spontaneous forced moments that they can anticipate that the network will then put online, and then it'll get shared on Instagram and whatever. And so there's been a big push to not only have our content be kind of fun and entertaining, but think about moments that can happen in a very contained space that might be funny and be like, the sort of, oh no, he didn't kind of moment. And so a lot of times it can be fun, but there's also times where it can be frustrating because you've got writers who are writing like really funny bits and categories or content or whatever, and then we're sort of told, well, yeah, that's all great, but once per show, you got to do this thing that's going to clearly resonate online and serve the corporate master. So that's been a little frustrating when that happens for me.
What about you, Terry?
So because all of my work is behind the scenes, I mean, you'll never see me on air, right? Mm-hmm. But all of my colleagues who are on air are experiencing more and more of the lifting of the curtain. You're seeing more of the wizard behind that curtain. And so there's an accessibility to the people who are on air, and also, in some ways also to me, but there's more accessibility, which means, I don't want to be negative, but there's more people under attack. So, my colleagues who are friends, they're coworkers, the emails, the tweets, the messages through Facebook, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're fat, the ability for audiences to reach out to the people who are these particular content creators, it makes it a little uglier. But then the good thing is that you create more of a relationship with your community. So there's a good side and bad side to this accessibility, especially through social media. So, I've received, Facebook messages from people saying, I have a really good story idea, or, oh, hey, my sister's doing such and such, in a way that before they may have to have called the station, or they may have to send an email, or we still would get traditional letters, like a piece of paper sent to us. So it's a good and bad. The curtain is lifting a little bit between the content creator and the audiences.
And have either of you seen, through the progression of your careers, different opportunities or expectations that have been placed on creatives or writers now as opposed to in the past when there was less people that you kind of see behind that curtain, as you say?
Again, amazing question. Clearly, that you can hear it from there. There's been. Honestly, it's going to sound like sort of the negative side of things, but there's been a little bit of a frustration with writers because, first of all, over the years, ad time has increased in a half hour. I'm sure it's frustrating the viewers as well. So it used to be, for example, I work on the $100,000 pyramid, and in a half hour in the 1980s, when the show was in its heyday, there were 24 minutes of content and 6 minutes of commercials. And there's now, I believe, 21 minutes and 30 seconds, and then 8.5 minutes of commercials. But it's the same game. So the challenge has been, how do you format that game, and where do you trim it so that you're not compromising what's really a great game format if you're a game person, but you also don't want to make it feel edited within an inch of its life. But in terms of the another thing that restrictions that have been placed on us is we now are in a DVR world where people want to skip these commercials. So certain networks and production companies have gotten savvy to this, and they've tried to weave in corporate placement, or there happens to be a Coke can sitting next to Simon Cowell on American Idol, just so happens. And I worked for a couple seasons on Survivor as a consultant, coming up with the tribal challenges that they have, which was a very cool and bizarre job. And we had one meeting per season where it was literally, here are the ad sponsors we have, see if you can figure out a way to make a challenge out of it. I have to kind of force myself to think, well, this is a fun, different challenge, but there's a part of me that, dies a little bit inside, because it's I want to write the best fun challenge. I don't want to have, start with a Pontiac Aztec and then work backward from there. But, if that's what it means in our current day and age, there's this also general fear that with, kids and millennials, that they're no longer even watching TV, that they're all watching on their phones and watching stuff to go. So if this is what's going to help keep TV as a viable medium, there's a certain amount of compromise I think we have to make and figure out creative solutions to.
As a quick aside, that's funny, I actually did a freelance producing gig for the casting call of Survivor. Is that
Did you really?
Yeah, actually, if you want to know secrets of how to get on Survivor, come on.
Well, and now I kind of want to know.
That's another session. Of course, as we move through time, there's this commodification of media, right? We're consuming media. So, in television news, it's this weird amalgamation, this combination of we're journalists, but we're on TV. So, Marshall McLuhan said medium is the message. So it's a very unique environment, and you're constantly sort of balancing this very image conscious, very, what are we presenting with, we are journalists. We are trying to present the truth. This is nonfiction. We swear, we promise, but then it comes with a lot of shiny lights and a lot of glitter and airbrushed makeup and all of this. So, but even more so now, you see companies like Sinclair. I don't know if anyone's been following this. And I used to actually work for a TV station that was owned by Sinclair, and we had to have a certain amount of time embedded in our newscasts that were basically editorials on behalf of the company. So, for most news personnel, we never have to do anything with the sales side, but that's how we're paid. Right? It's not like there's this magic money that's falling off trees. So we know that our income is coming from sales. So it's this very, we really want to be telling the truth, and we want to be putting together this excellent product that speaks to people, it brings people together, but we're TV. So it's this weird balance.
And I'd be curious, how do you go about producing or writing when you don't always necessarily know what an interviewee, like your TV or a contestant might say? There's some unpredictability there. How do you try to mitigate that?
I want to hear about what Snoop might have done, because I have to kind of move around that.
Honestly, he's high all the time, so it could be anything. The producing for contestant things, there's pre-interviewing that happens. So in casting, they'll find out their story and they'll talk to them. Usually in their audition, what we'll do is we'll ask them to fill out a questionnaire. So in addition to taking a test to gauge their aptitude for the game itself, we'll kind of find out do they have any interesting stories or like an amazing heartfelt thing about what they do if they won $50,000 that would make them very rootable. And then, we'll talk to them and we'll gauge their personality. But at the end of the day, a great format and a great MC and this is true, I think, of, like late night talk shows too. It's sort of like you go in loaded for bear, ready for, to ask a question that is guaranteed to get you a certain response. But sometimes then the follow-up questions will lead you in a very fascinating, crazy place that you weren't expecting. And like we had one just this past week, this contestant had won the game and he gets to the bonus round. He's getting ready to play for the big money. And so Snoop Dogg asks him, what would you do if you won $50,000? And he throws his hands up and he goes, I'm buying a cat! And we're like, great, that's fantastic. But sometimes then it's this awkward moment because the crowd responds much like you did. And then Snoop plays off that, and then it just becomes this natural back and forth. And sometimes you just get great, spontaneous stuff out of that because, you just don't know. It is reality TV at its core in the sense that you just don't know how someone's going to react when they win big or they lose big or they're asked a ridiculous question.
Well, and if I'm working on something and I'm putting together a project that is very interview-based, that's it. The fun part is, this took me in a whole other direction. I hadn't even considered this. It's like I have a friend and colleague who compares this to if you tell someone a story, you give them a couple words or phrases, and they go like this. Oh, tell me more. Like, oh, kittens. That's what, those are the moments I love. So when you're interacting with people and you're getting their stories, oh, tell me more, kittens. So, but in a live situation, it's a whole other, it's something else. So imagine if you're going on a trip somewhere and it may be rainy, but you're not quite sure. And you only have so much space in your overnight bag. Like, do I take an umbrella? Do I not take an umbrella? Okay, I'm gonna not take an umbrella because I wanna have room for an extra pair of shoes or a scarf or whatever it is. You better know when you get there where you can buy an umbrella. So that's what producing and writing things live is like. You better know where to find that darn umbrella, but you don't necessarily have to pack one. And once you make that decision to buy that umbrella, you can't go back. Like you can't return that umbrella. So when you're working in a very high stress, once it's out there, you can't say, I changed my mind. Can we not do that? Can we not go to that live shot? Can we not roll that video? Can we not do this? No, it's done. Imagine making a life decision and you can never go back. That's what it's like.
Committed, yeah. I'd like to know, just briefly, how did each of you get started in the industry? Was there a particular breakout moment, or was it, over time? And then also, if you could go back and give a piece of advice, like your 20-year-old self, what do you wish you could tell yourself?
The best thing I did was doing an internship when I was still in college, which if that's an option to, if any of you are looking to get into it or your kids or whomever, I learned more in 3 months interning for an actual network than I learned in 4 years of college because, not to, we're on a college campus, not to downgrade the importance of an education, but a lot of times in film school, there'll be sort of like an iteration behind everyone in terms of the technology. So like the editing, everyone was doing online editing in the real world, and we were still doing offline editing on VHS. And, so I guess it's great in the sense of like learning how our forefathers, edited things, but it doesn't really prepare you, for a real world thing. But honestly, just even running around and just being part of just by osmosis, you understand how there's a deadline and come hell or high water, the show's going to get produced, and there's something about that urgency and the realness of it that just grounds you in, okay, I guess this is what it's really like to be in the world. Not to mention the fact that you're learning skills there. You're also meeting people. They always talk about networking and the importance of that. But if you're actually, it's easier to, be in the party if you're already at the party, so to speak. Just make that up. I don't know what that means.
No, that's very cool. Tweet it. You can share.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Snackable.
Yes, exactly. Lots of snacks there. Yeah, so that was, my most important attribute. And then I was supposed to talk about what do I wish I could have done better.
What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self looking back? What do you think you would have known?
Well, I got fired from my first job out of college as I actually thought I was going to go into sitcoms briefly. So I worked on a show that actually had the distinction of being out of 109 shows in primetime. It was the 109th rated show on TV. It's called Nick Freno, Licensed Teacher. It was on the WB, which no longer, so bad the network doesn't exist anymore. No, I just came out of college and I, came from, was fortunate enough to go to a private school and nice upbringing, and so I didn't have really any sense of okay, I like nothing that I did, no matter what I did in college, no matter what any accolades I had in high school, nobody cares about that. You've got to earn your keep right then and there. So I was showing up 15, 20 minutes late to work, and I was doing whatever the bare minimum was that was asked of me, and I never really thought, oh, maybe while I'm here, I should be talking to, if I want to write, maybe I should be finding a moment in the coffee room and be like, hey, so how'd you get your, just having those conversations or, finding ways to sort of let people know what it is I wanted to do. And instead, I kind of was just biding my time. And ultimately, I was let go, which was uncomfortable because the producer who hired me was my next door neighbor at the time. So I would see her kind of every day after that. But it was a painful but important experience because I learned that nothing is given to you in TV, especially in Hollywood. It's there's always 100 people waiting in line to take your job. So if you get in there and you have an opportunity, do everything you can to sort of prove not only that you're good at your job, but that you're really motivated and you treat it importantly and you're grateful for your job because a number of people will be happy to take it for you if you're not. Yeah.
I was coming from the world of writing. I mean, I knew really, really young that I loved the written word. This is one of those environments and moments where I want to get teary-eyed. I knew really little that I wanted to do something with writing and something with communication. So my major as an undergraduate was journalism. I was going to be a writer. I was going to have a fedora. I was going to wear a raincoat. Maybe I was going to have a log cabin somewhere, and I was going to write. And don't lie. There are some people in this room that's your fantasy. I know this. I know who you are. And but I was sitting in a classroom, and it was and this was again when I was an undergraduate. And so there was a guest speaker who came in actually from one of the local TV stations, and I was also very into elections and politics. I love watching how systems work and understanding the players, and not in a really dirty, disgusting kind of way, politics, but just the interaction in the system. And so the speaker was saying, we take kind of contract workers, stringers, freelancers we'll call them, and they basically work on election night and help us do things for the news coverage. And I'm like, okay. But what I had to do was I had to call this particular executive producer and say, hi, I met you, I'm Terry Filipowicz, and I really am interested. Well, what she was doing, of course, was kind of weeding out who really wants to be doing this. And so I made the phone call, and this was, you couldn't email, you couldn't do anything like that, you had to call. And so that started on a path that every time there was an election, this was in Sacramento, so every time there was an election, every couple of years, for the governor, for the president, I was there. And then eventually I was there enough that someone said, hey, how about that? Filipowicz, maybe for this entry-level $5 per hour or whatever it was job. And you're putting together scripts and you're doing some minor writing and you're running the teleprompter. And then I moved on from that. But what I'd like to go back and tell myself from 20 years ago then is do more of that. Make those phone calls. Especially all of you who are here at this festival, even the folks you're sitting next to are other creatives and people who are interested in what you're doing. I hand out my card so often and then I never hear again from that person. And I think, I really liked what that person was writing. I really liked that person's passion. I want to, and Mari mentioned what my dream is. I want to build a media and education empire and connect people with other people. So I want to help people. I want to make your lives better and help you do neat creative things. So I would like to go back 20 years ago and say, make more of those phone calls. Ask more questions of the people I was working with at the TV station. that went on to, network level jobs, or I regret that I didn't learn more technical skills. Our particular stations in which I worked have not necessarily been strong union shops, meaning that I had access to equipment. I could have done more editing.
So get your cards, right?
Well,
Yeah, exactly.
And I was gonna say too, it's like I remember being very intimidated, like early in my career, thinking, okay, everybody's looking at me and watching me, and I gotta perform, and oh my god, and it's about me. And now that I have kind of worked my way up, and I'm now producing, and then I'm working with writers and other people, I realized that when we look at somebody and we're evaluating them based on, did they show up when they said they were going to do it? Did they get their script in on time? Did they do this? Can I rely on them? Producers are terrified people. Like, we're constantly worried because we're under tremendous stress too from the network and the budgets and the schedules and all that. We're worried that we're not going to deliver. And so when we look at somebody, a writer or even a production assistant or whatever, we want people we know that we can lean on, that we can trust, that are going to do their job. So it's like, it was almost a little bit enlightening when I thought on the way up, when I started realizing, it's not about me, it's about making my boss feel comfortable. And if I can make my boss feel comfortable, that's like half of it. And then the fact that I happen to be an okay writer is almost as important. Like the idea that you're somebody you can rely on, and also just be someone who's cool under duress, that if there's rewrites and we're there till midnight, that person's there not complaining. They're a team effort. We understand that it is what it is. This is our gig, and it's not like, well, I'm going to leave early because my job is done and this guy next to me can't seem to get it together or whatever. No, it's about let's see what's going on. What's going on with his story? Why can't he finish his quota? Let's brainstorm. Let's get it done. And if you have that kind of attitude, they see that, and that is as valuable as any sort of creative attribute, in my opinion.
Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
If we were both working on some show right now together and we had little cards in front of us, it would say the buck stops here. Because for a producer, even if something happens, at least in my world, I don't know if you can have the same experience or not, but in my world, even if it's not my fault, it's my fault. So, whether it's a misspelling that goes on air, we know what happens. I'm so sorry. I apologize on behalf of all of us, but even if it's not someone's fault, I take responsibility for it. You have to. The product that you're putting together is you. You kind of corralled all the people and all the resources to present this, so you have to take responsibility. So it's so important then that you cultivate this environment of trusting each other, of knowing we're all in this together, rather than that kind of thing, that you have to be part of the team.
No, sure. And we've got a room full of creatives here, of writers, and I think it's really important for all of us to kind of talk about the idea of failure, because it's just a part of everything that we do. And I was curious if you guys have a particular failure in mind that you could share that maybe helps set the stage for later success.
I only work on hits, I'm sorry. I worked on several shows that were failures for sure. You just never know. Honestly, like the story I told you about getting fired from that first production assistant job was a failure. That's a sort of thing that I look at as a constructive thing. Failure from the standpoint of how we learned from it, or just
what you've learned, or
just humanizing us as being.
No, but something you learned from something that happened in the past, and you can use that maybe to make better decisions or learn going forward.
Okay. These are both the things I'm going to mention are very kind of granular, specific things, but they have to do more with the formatting of game shows and kind of how the game is set up. I actually, before I worked on the $100,000 pyramid, currently in the early 2000s, there was a syndicated version that I was a writer for, with Donny Osmond as the host. I don't know if you guys vaguely remember. It was on for like 2 seasons. And not quite as good. But it was, the reason I mentioned before, where it used to be 24 minutes of programming, and then they cut it down to 21, 30. Well, someone determined that we're not going to take that 2.5 minutes out of the contestant or celebrity interviews. We're going to make sure that we talk about whatever book they're promoting or the movie that they're coming out with. But instead, we're going to take it out of the game itself. So if it gets familiar, if you know the format pyramid, as some of you know. So the basic game round is you pick a category and then you have to convey to your partner in 30 seconds up to 7 words or phrases. And you have to do it using pantomime or clues, whatever, saying anything other than part of the word itself. But they determined that the best way to trim 2 minutes out of this was out of all 12 categories, take 10 seconds out of the round. So make it from 30 seconds to 20 seconds. And so this is sort of a decision that we reached as a group there. We discussed, and I remember thinking, I don't know, is this really the best place to take it out of? Because, here we have this game that was a hit and we don't know. So what ended up happening is we said, okay, you only have to get 6 right in 20 seconds instead of 7 in 30. And if you do the math, it's actually like it probably should have been more like 5 in 20 seconds. It sounds like not a big deal, but what it resulted in was this like frantic clue-giving thing. So it's like, okay, this is the animal of the park, so it's a dog, right, okay, and this is the thing that when and it was just this agitating thing. And I remember after I got the job, my mom, who will watch any show I do just to see her name in the credits, basically at the end, and my aunt, who grew up loving this show, said, "We love you, but we, as senior citizens, it gives us such agita to watch these people in 20 seconds try to give clues that we won't watch the show." They would not watch this revival of their favorite game show that I was working on because it was so anxiety provoking. And, the story there is that a lot of times you'll make a sort of a knee-jerk decision to change something or without really testing it out. And I firmly believe that, Donny Osmond was actually fine as a host, and there were some other things you could point to about it. But I truly believe to this day the reason that didn't work is because it was a 20-second round and not a 30-second round, and people just, if it feels uncomfortable to watch, no one's going to want to watch. So we failed. And the other thing that I worked on, the cavalcade of failure, is there's a show I worked on that was on for a hot minute. It's called The Million Second Quiz on NBC. Ryan Seacrest, it was like one of his 27 shows he was hosting at the time. And the fact that we had someone who was so overexposed may have contributed to that, but it was basically, the intent was it was an 11.5-day marathon quiz where it was 2 people playing against each other, sort of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire style, where they were answering multiple choice questions, but they were doing it in these 300-second bouts. So whoever was in the lead at the end of that bout got to stay on. The other person was eliminated, and they brought somebody else in who was waiting in line in New York City and had qualified to be on the show. So the idea was the show itself was spread over 11.5 days or 1 million seconds. So in theory, someone could go on and could be this like grueling, you're like for 4 straight days, you're winning and you're up to like, $500,000 or whatever in earnings. But the reality is we never tested it enough on its feet. What we should have been doing is before we went to air, we should have literally staged a 1 million second quiz in our offices. And as a result, we had, nobody ever went longer than like 7 hours or whatever. So you didn't have that amazing marathon success that you wanted. But then there was also all these different rules. Like at the time, Big Brother was on, was still kind of, I guess it's still on the air now too. But I mean, everybody loved the fact that people were living together and then the drama of that. So they're like, great, in addition to this, we'll also show reality of them behind the scenes, like whoever the leaders are living together and hopefully arguing with each other, but nobody tested that out and they never argued, so it was boring. And it became this perfect storm of like trying to be a little bit of everything, but not enough of any one thing. And so the lesson here was like, if you're gonna try something this is more like a development standpoint, test it first, see if it works, like spend the time and the resources before you go live and spend millions of dollars on the network's sort of profile, and see if the thing that you actually created is fatally flawed. And in both of those cases, I think it was.
If you walk into a newsroom, if the writers are doing a good job, you will hear them all reading their stories aloud. We write for the ear. It just happens to be a visual medium in television, but you're writing for the ear. You're writing for the person who's wandered off into the kitchen and they're doing this, or they're wandering off onto the garage and they're doing that, or whatever. So many times though, when you're in a rush, you you don't do that. So I've written stories very, very quickly. And I've written 30-second stories in 10 seconds, or 1-minute stories in 10 seconds. And sometimes I hear the words come out of somebody else's mouth, and I think, I'm going to pretend I'm not the one who wrote that. It doesn't even sound like a human speaking. What is that? It's like they read the sentence backwards. It's just, so there are those types of like everyday failures. I think really one of the things that I want to impart when it comes to failure is I fail all the time. I know it's like a dramatic statement, but I have given so many pitches. I have talked to so many people and tried to start so many projects, and then like nothing comes of that. Earlier today, I don't know to whom I was speaking, but I gave the quote, I get a lot of yellow lights, but I don't get a lot of green lights. So it's this belief, though, in the craft and the belief in the joy of what you're doing. I mean, honestly, this is really hard work. And there's a lot of failures and a lot of rejections. And doing something for the love of it, whether you're writing or whatever, and the amount of rejections, you start feeling like a failure. You know, it's like going to 60 million job interviews and you don't get an offer. It's like, what am I doing? Is it my hair? What's going on? So just kind of moving forward as a creative, but then also looking at things very objectively and saying, okay, what did I do? What did I say? And what can I learn from this situation? In this case, it would be, maybe there should be some more developmental part of what we're producing. But it's really, don't let the rejections then become your failure. So like move forward. One thing that they say, of course, about being an author is if you're concerned about getting all the rejections from a publishing house, then don't become an author. So that's probably what I'm going to say about failure.
You brought up a really good point about the reading something aloud and just double checking like what it actually sounds like. There's a phenomenal story I've been told is true that there's a game show in the late 70s. And this is back when, like on Price is Right, they're always doing this announced prize copy. It's a new car, it's a 19 blah, 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 with hatchback, with California emission, all this kind of stuff. So somebody writes all that. And there was a story, this is a show, an actual game show, and the grand prize of it was a trip to Hawaii. And I guess what the intended prize copy was, you're going to go on a trip to Hawaii to have the most restful experience you've ever had. And what they read was, you're going to Hawaii for the rest of your lives. And the woman ended up winning the grand prize and was like, oh my God, I'm going to Hawaii forever. And as soon as the show was over, what they do is they bring them to the prize sign-up person, and I guess she was like, I can't believe it, I'm going to live in Hawaii forever. And they're like, oh, no, it's just a 7-day, 6-night thing. And she said, that's not what you said on air. Then her lawyer called and sued the show. And the production company ended up settling with her, and they sent her to Hawaii, all expenses paid, for 2 years because of the mistake they made. So, yeah, read your work aloud first.
Oh, man. Well, on that note, I've got one last quick question, and then I want to make sure we have time to give away some games here. But if there's one thing that you could have people kind of know about what you do, or one piece of information that you'd like listeners today to take away, what would you like to tell them? What do you want them to know?
This may be slightly a repeat from what I just said, but seriously, don't give up. And Aaron mentioned doing an internship, and I mentioned, I got my start when somebody came to a college classroom. You can still do these things even if you're not in college. There are still avenues that if you want to pursue something that is related to television, you want to write, you want to produce, there's still things locally, whether you're here in Tucson or you're elsewhere, community organizations that can help you fulfill those dreams of putting something together and then having it show up on any type of screen. So, maybe this is kind of trite, but don't give up on your dreams and absolutely just keep forging forward.
in the 80s when I was a kid and watching game shows, there were 3 major networks and only so much programming time. And there's now 500 some cable channels 24 hours a day that are trying to fill time, and there's programming, and they're constantly, new shows are coming in, going out, whatever. So I would say if you're halfway decent at your job, but you're responsible and you show up on time, you can absolutely have a career in television in this day and age.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I'm on my way